Okay. Yes. Yes, thank you so much. My name is Anas Bulal. I'm from UNESCO, in charge of the higher education. And today we've been talking, and also yesterday, on policies and many other things. But I think the voice of students, and as we say, the learning should be student-focused. Therefore, we are pleased today to have the representative of the Global Forum of Students, and I'm honored to invite you to replace Sebastian, I think, but I think you will introduce yourself to other one and so on. Thank you so much and welcome.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I'm obviously not Sebastian. I'm actually shorter than him. And I'm Carmen Romero, a steering committee member of the Global Student Forum. And I'm going to be introducing the importance of student participation. And while doing that, I'm going to also present the Global Student Forum as a newly created organization. Maybe after, in the QA session, we can discuss why is it important to promote and to preserve student participation and why students are such a key actor when it comes to the education sector. If you wonder what the GSF does, but also like what student participation means, we always say, why are we here? Well, we are connecting people, but we're also strengthening solidarity among student unions all over the world. We're also focusing a lot on capacity building for students' organizations. We cooperate and we are creating a lot of projects with student unions, as I said, from different parts of the world. And we also analyze and discuss the current situation of education from a student perspective in order to develop our own policies and to do, therefore, advocacy activities. But before continuing with that, I'm going to give you a bit of context on who are our main organizations or our main members. As I said before, we are a newly created organization. We are just 2 years old. But as you might know, the student movement has a lot of history. And these are the main organizations who funded the Global Student Forum. There's the European Student Union, who works at the European level and represents more than 20 million students all across European countries, but not just European, also a bit more. We have, for example, Armenia, Israel, and ESU basically focus on also capacity building, different kind of projects, and represent student unions in different kind of processes at the European level, such as the Bologna process and other institutions like also UNESCO. Then we have OBESU, the Organizing Bureau of European School Student Unions. It was created in 1975. It has right now 32 member unions, and like ESU, it represents students, but from the secondary level in Europe. These two organizations are the main representative structures, organizations of students in Europe. Then we have ASU, which is the All African Student Unions, who it's another umbrella organization representing students all across Africa. They fight mainly for freedom of speech, academic freedom, students' rights, and of course, depending on the country, they focus more on human rights, understanding also students' rights as human rights. It's also well organized and has a lot of history. Then we have OCLAE, which is the Organización Continental y Latinoamericana y Caribeña de Estudiantes, who represents students all across Latin America and the Caribbean region. This organization is actually quite militant in its way of organizing. They are very strong when it comes to organizing demonstrations and protests and rallies. And as you might know, there are many movements very strong in Latin America, such as, for example, the case of Chile. They're also members of OCLAE in this case. And finally, we have the Commonwealth Student Association, which is rather more focused on advocacy. And it represents students' organizations from countries who are part of the Commonwealth. So this is a bit of of a introduction of who we are. Apart from these main regional platforms, we have many other organizations and student-led movements who are members of the Global Student Forum and who represent different kind of styles of organizing and participation. Yeah, so as I was saying, the Global Student Forum is by now the world's major representative student federations and the only independent, democratic, and representative student governance structure at the global level. As I said before, we are just 2 years old, and we were founded by the organizations that I just mentioned. This is a glimpse of what we have. I have to tell you that this map is actually a bit outdated, but this is mainly where we have students' organizations. As you might see, we are not so strong yet in the MENA region, for example, and this is, of course, a matter of the context of the region. We face a lot of issues when it comes to persecution of students in many countries, and we are still developing contacts and trying to strengthen our presence in certain kind of countries and regions. So looking at the bigger picture, and we've been discussing a lot these days about different kind of stakeholders, organizations at the global level. We have here some of our partners, but also organizations that work on different sectors. Within education, we have, for example, the International Association of Universities, Education International that represents teachers, unions, and the ITUC, who represents trade unions. But like, if you look at this, you might wonder, where were students all this time? Because actually, till this 2 years ago, we didn't have an organization that represented students at the global level. Therefore, we didn't have a unique voice to present our demands all together at once. This is very interesting. So the first atom that was existing in the past, it was the International Union of Students, but it was also object of the context, and what happened is that at some point, this is very briefly, it was very divided by what was happening. And part of it was funded by the American CIA, another part by the KGB, and as an organization that suffered a lot from the context, at the end it lost its relevance. So this is a bit of the background. As I was saying before, we started, most of the attempts made to create such a global organization were made or led by the European Student Union, and thanks to different colleagues who were working in the past, we managed to, in February 2020, start a proper discussion with Education International, who are currently hosting us in Brussels. And they are, in a way, incubating us. We are being really supported and thankful for that. I have to say that one of the main issues when having these kind of discussions, it was not just about how to create such an organization, but also how to maintain it, how to fund it. Discussions about, finance of the organization, independence, but also how to respect the differences between the movements all across the world. And I have to say, if you might wonder how come such different organizations from different contexts have been able to unite and to leave aside sometimes certain kind of concerns, it's because actually there is a crisis in the world, and this crisis is very much influencing education. So our demands are very similar despite our very many differences. So when, as I said before, where was the student movement at the global level before? We have very important actors at the global level who have within themselves and their structures ways of taking stakeholders' opinions and including different kind of stakeholders in their decision-making process or structures. But unfortunately, till 2 years ago, we didn't have such an organization who could represent the demands of the student at the global level. And that's why the Global Student Forum is such an important actor nowadays for students, because, as I said, it helps to unite, but also to strengthen our demands and the way that we advocate for them. This is how the Global Student Forum works internally. So as I said before, we were funded by the regional platforms ESUA, SUOCLAE, CSA, and OVESU. These major regional platforms are the one selecting one person each to be part of the steering committee. And then we have two different members who are consociates and associates. They represent national unions of students who are not part of a regional platform, for example, Canada or Australia or New Zealand. They are not part of a regional platform, but yet they are part of the associate members, and therefore they have a say also, and they have the possibility through organizing a caucus within our structures to elect a person to be also represented in the steering committee. And then the rest of the organizations are student-led organizations who might work on different kind of issues. So for example, in Chile, we have one organization who works for the protection of democracy, and it's a student-led organization. So when there are these kind of organizations who represent, in a way, our values, they're also part, because we want to be as inclusive as possible and to really try to bring together students. So one of the key points that I would like to discuss with many of you, it's like one of the projects that we have nowadays that we are developing. It's actually a research project called CHEDGE. This project is led by Mania Klemenjik, is one of the former student representatives from the European Student Union, and she is now currently leading this project from her position in Harvard. And we are basically analyzing means of participation at the global level. We are developing a handbook for student participation that basically analyze and showcase the different means of participation. So basically, we are analyzing the European Student Union, SUOCLAE, CSA, and OVESU, but also national cases. So in each of the continents, we will have different kind of examples of how students organize and how they not just organize, but also how they develop their advocacy activity. This is all from my side, but I'm really happy to have a conversation with all of you or to answer any questions. Thank you.
We have 15 minutes time if you'd like to interact. So please, this is the time.
Yes.
Hi, thank you, Carmen, for the overview, and congrats for having this session here. Although I must confess, remembering from my old student union movement days, I would have loved to see this point of view a bit more prominent in the program. But I do understand that it's only been 2 years since the Global Student Forum was set up. Congrats for setting it up. I remember in the 2000s, it was really difficult to get over the history of the International Student Union and sort of convince the other regional platforms that it's time to sort of create a new basis and adapt to the new needs of international student representation. I'm just going to ask, because you said that Mania is helping you, and I think that's very good. She documented a lot of the history of the student movement. But I'm wondering, in terms of your priorities, what do you plan to do next? and what's your official relationship with bodies, international bodies, such as the OECD, UNESCO, even the UN? Now the UN has this summit in September on transforming education, and it would be very useful to see the student voice in that conversation. Thank you.
Thank you. So I'm going to start from the end. I think, as you know from your experience, and probably you know better than me, the wars are not just won in one day. And it's taken quite some time to be actually accepted in many places. We are, of course, knocking on every door because we do believe that the students have to be represented everywhere or in those places where decisions are being taken. But that doesn't mean that everyone is super welcoming, of course. So, for example, with UNESCO, we are working with different departments. We have been working a lot with them on the GEM report, for example, and we've been trying also to lobby UNESCO to implement or create more meaningful spaces for student participation. This is something, of course, that it still needs a lot of push from our side and a lot of understanding from UNESCO's side as much as any other organizations or institutions. With the OECD, we've been as well in conversations. We've been invited to different kind of events and meetings. We don't have yet a proper, let's say, structure or organic way of participation or engagement directly with them, but for sure we're on it. And then I think your first question was what's next. So now we've been in this organization like for 2 years. Soon a new steering committee will be taking over. And I think it's first of all very important that we will have this handover period, that a lot of new people will come with many more fresh ideas and ready to keep on fighting for student participation. What we're working a lot on now, for example, it's human rights and considering students' rights as human rights, because we do see, as I said before, a lot of problems in many different countries where students are actually facing a lot of troubles for just speaking up. And this is a problem because, of course, if you cannot even speak up, there are very little things you can do, right? We're also working a lot on climate change and sustainability because, of course, it's something that matters for the present generations, but also for the future ones. And something that it's not in your question, but I think it's also important to highlight is that unfortunately, and this is my very personal view, in general NGO sector or civil society sector, I think right now it's being very affected by the decisions or the way donors handle certain kind of conversations, and it's actually very difficult to continue being really independent and truthful to your values while knowing that you're not always going to be funded the way you would like to be. So these are still things that I think future generations will have to handle. And of course, I think it's also very important that we have people that has experience in the past, like Mania or even you, from time to time, ask difficult questions. Yeah, no, go for it.
Okay, maybe for the online. Sorry, for the online version, I'm going to use the mic. I was in a panel earlier this morning, but also yesterday, on the impact of COVID on teachers and teachers associations and the unions of teachers. And since you are working so closely with Education International, they said basically that in Central and Eastern Europe, unionizing was very hard during COVID times, and the number of members in teachers' trade unions basically decreased. In other parts of the world, like Canada, for example, or Nigeria, they've seen strikes. In Canada, they've never seen strikes of higher education teaching staff. And they've seen 5 of those in the past year, and that was remarkable for them. So it's clear that there were a lot of pressures and people reacted differently. I'm just going to ask, how do you feel that student organizations dealt with these 2 years of pandemic? Did you see the same diversity of responses?
It actually varies a lot from, of course, one place to another, especially if we look at the global level, it really varies also from continent to continent. So when the pandemic started to hit, I was still part of the HACS team in the European Student Union, and I did remember that many things changed internally on the way that we were approaching certain kind of meetings, organizing ourselves, and of course a lot of member unions were facing different kind of troubles and challenges. I think students are not seeing the impact on the way that they're not gonna stop like participating or trying to reclaim the space, but I think the way that they're gonna reclaim for that space, it's changing, because also like I believe when it comes, for example, to university students, when you are entering university, it's, you have that first kind of glimpse of what university life is and how students' associations organize at the very local level. For these 2 years, even in the first one, students were not even being able to participate in the life at the campus. So I think the participation is going to change in that sense because they haven't been into that culture of organizing in many ways. So I don't know, maybe now they're more into certain generations, or some people are more into TikTok than into demonstrating as such. And I do see a lot of cases of different ways of organizing. In Latin America, for example, it was actually very different, and actually one of the first demonstrations that was organized in Brazil by the national student unions in Brazil against Bolsonaro. It was a massive demonstration where they were actually reclaiming better policies for education, but also vaccines for everyone. And this also has an impact on the way they reclaim things, because in certain countries there's this huge amount of people who don't believe in vaccines or who don't believe in COVID. Therefore, that's also part of the agenda now, and it's an important part of the agenda also for students. But this demonstration, it was huge. It was supported, it was organized in Brazil, but it was supported by a lot of countries in Latin America. So you could see still that the solidarity among students internationally is there, and it's not lost. So, well, we have a different kind of criteria to be a member of the Global Student Forum. For us, it's very important to have independent democratic structures. And by independent, I mean that they are independent from governments, but also from party politics. So, of course, we are doing politics in a way and policies, but that doesn't mean that we are related to a specific party in countries. And the problem is that in many countries of the world, and especially in those regions where there are still a lot of radicalism, authoritarianism, and you don't have actually democratic governments as such, it's also very difficult to have democratic organizations, because it's really difficult, first of all, to organize, but also to be independent from, for example, having funding and being able to have an independent agenda from other actors. That doesn't mean that we don't have contacts there. We do, and we try as much as possible to reach to other students and to try to also have capacity building. One good thing of the COVID pandemic for us, it was that because we were created in actually 2020, most of our activities for 2 years have been online. And because they were online, we could open them to anyone. So we always open our events, activities, debates, webinars, discussions to any students, but also to anyone who might be interested. And that then we have, for example, usually a lot of students from India who want to participate, who are part of, in a way, our working groups or discussions, because of course we know they are there and they need their support, and we are there to support them.
Just a little bit provocative question from my side, and I think, do you understand the real need of the students globally?
Can you repeat?
Do you understand the real needs of the students globally? What are the main challenges what the students of the universities and the higher education institutions are facing now and maybe in the near future?
Well, I think in general there are many problems when it comes to, for example, access to education. This is just not a problem that affects Europe or Africa or Latin America. I think, unfortunately, even though inequalities are represented in a different way, they are rooted in similar manners. And the problem is that we have systems all over the world that don't always allow students to be part of the education institutions. This is one of the main issues that we have still nowadays, access to education and understanding education as a right. And I always say that if rights are not accessible, they're not right, they are privileges. And the problem is that in many countries of the world, we're also working, for example, with the Global Campaign for Education and with other organizations. And there are then also many problems when it comes, for example, to who access education, but also there are many women and girls who still face way more challenges than men. We work a lot also with the 100 Million campaign because we believe that child labor is a social disease that must end. And we believe that those child labor victims should be students that one day we will represent, hopefully. So there are many different things. Of course, if we go, I don't know, to Spain, which is my home country, I know everything of it. But luckily for us, I think our network is big enough, and we are by now, also thanks to technologies, very well connected to, of course, I'm not going to know exactly what happened in a small village in Nigeria, but I know that the student union in Nigeria is aware of it, and I have a direct contact with them to actually show solidarity and to try to also lobby organizations that I might be able to contact. I would say that one of the main challenges, as I said, is access to education, access to quality education. Another big challenge now with the climate change, but also, of course, I cannot not mention many conflicts. Of course, there's right now Ukraine, but there are many conflicts in the world that affect students. We are also part of the Education in Emergency campaign that basically it's reclaiming better funding for education, but also understanding that emergencies are not just conflicts, but also climate change is affecting education and natural disasters. So there are many things that affect students. Of course, we don't have the solutions for all the problems, but we are here to try to figure out the solutions with whoever wants to discuss them with us.
Could I have a short comment? I'm Damir from Czech Student Union, and as you mentioned the last question, I generally believe that when we are speaking about education, no matter on local, regional, or global level, we should involve all different stakeholders, including students. And I'm happy that students can be part of this conference in Barcelona. However, I believe that GSF will have more and more closer cooperation with UNESCO and other stakeholders. So in the future, we will see more students here and also more students involved in panels, because there were workshops and other events that were focused on students, for example, about students in QA, but there were no students involved in the panel.